warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from ever where you're joining. We will have today the third webinar series. My name is Uwe Rüdenklau. I will give a short introduction. But before this, give me a few words on this third webinar series, which we're doing from 5G-ACIA, discussing on the 5G-ACIA's perspective on testing, as you can read here, of 5G, and explains what 5G-ACIA's test endorsement is all about. We will talk here and have a discussion from Dr. Engineering Lisa Underberg from ifak today, and she will give, related to a white paper which we did earlier, a lot of information here about the testing types, which we will discuss closer. 5G-ACIA also view on certification will be presented, putting testing considerations in practice, how 5G-ACIA endorses test beds since early of last year, I have to say, 2021, and how we aim to accelerate also the adaptation of 5G in industrial applications. We will hear more in the webinar, as said, from Lisa Underberg. Before these details, we come to the details, and you will have also options to react on live polls. I will give some general informations. Said myself, again, my name is Uwe Rüdenklau, coming from the company Infineon, also taking care here in 5G-ACIA of another working group 4 as a vice chair, talking today live from Munich, Germany. I would introduce the speaker today, which is Lisa Underberg from ifak. She is also the working group 5 chair, which is taking care of this testing topic, and talks today live from Magdeburg, Germany. So Lisa, I will hand over then to you. Thank you.
Okay, as Uwe introduced, my name is Lisa Underberg. I work with ifak, the Institute for Automation and Communication located in Magdeburg, and as working group 5 chair, in charge of the testing and validations activities in 5G-ACIA. And in the first webinar of our third series, we're going to have an overview today about testing in 5G-ACIA in general. And in the 3 following webinars, as you might have noticed already, our endorsed testbeds have the chance to present themselves. So let's take a look at what we are going to see today. First, a quick reminder for those of you who are not that familiar with 5G-ACIA yet. We have 5 working groups. You can see them on the right-hand side in the picture. And every working group covers a different aspect of industrial 5G or in 5G in automation, so that overall 5G-ACIA covers every aspect that there is in industrial 5G. And today we're going to look into the aspects of testing and validation. And when 5G-ACIA was founded a couple of years ago, Working Group 5 started to look into the topic of testing in general. So what is there to test? What testing types could there be? What test objects? What objectives could we follow up with our testing? So we worked on a white paper, which is very extensive, and we sorted out our thoughts on that in the white paper. And in the first white paper, we made some prioritization, what to look at in 5G-ACIA. And later on today, we're going to take a look into that outcomes as well. So you know what 5G-ACIA decided to focus on. And one of the things that we decided to focus on was the performance testing. And what's so special about performance testing is also part of the talk today. We're going to have a look into the second white paper that Working Group 5 mainly wrote and edited. That's the one on performance testing. So you, after today's talk, you will get a little more comfortable with the term performance testing and what 5G-ACIA means when we're saying we're conducting a performance test. Based on all these theoretical approaches on the sorting out of thoughts, we also recognized that we need some hands-on experience. And for that, we set up an endorsement program for testbeds. And currently we're having 7 running testbeds and 2 more applications incoming. And these testbeds, these 7 testbeds, will have the opportunity to present themselves and their work later on in the follow-up webinars. And today I will not go into detail what the testbeds are doing or are working on, but I will explain what 5G-ACIA actually endorses and what the process is and what our process is to ensure that we have a quality outcome from our testbeds. So, and then, of course, Working Group 5's work does not stop here. We're also working on what's important tomorrow, so to say. And we're also having a quick preview on 5G-ACIA's work on certification topics, because yeah, certification will be relevant sometime soon. And now we're getting ahead of things, starting to think about what is important to industrial automation in terms of certification now. Okay, so that's the overview for now. Before we start with the contents, I'd like you to ask you to do something for me. So I guess you're all here because you're interested in industrial 5G and its application to industrial automation, for example, or to your specific use case. And what I want to ask you is to put on the glasses of your application, to see, just to be aware of what do you want to use 5G for in your very own specific case. So what is the application? Do I want to use 5G in my manufacturing process potentially, or am I already using it and have certain questions? Do I want to manufacture a 5G device and so on? So put that glasses on, and when you're hearing about testing types or different parameters to be tested, please keep in mind your application and your industrial application, and that would be helpful for us or for me when we're asking the questions you will encounter later on. So the questions there are 7 of them in total, and we have like 2 warm-up questions so you can get familiar with the voting tool. And I guess we'll just start with that. First question would be, which stakeholder group do you belong to? Now you should have a pop-up. I guess you can already see that in my screen here. You should have a pop-up where you can select your answer. The time limit should be, it's 1 minute actually. And you have 1 minute to choose from the 4 options, whether you are from an ICT company, so information communication technology, operational technology, academia, or others. Now I can see the results. Okay. We've got a lot of participants from ICT, about 50%, about 20% from OT, less than 10% academia, and 23% others, okay? So I guess it's very interesting for the ICT partners because I'm taking the OT perspective often, because 5G, after all, is from the OT perspective just a communication technology, and I think it's important that we get the same perspective on things. So I hope I can give you some interesting information today to the ICT members. And the OT, they can check whether they feel I represent their view well. Okay, let's move on to the second live poll, which is also a simple question, I guess. It is, which region do you come from? Here you find the continents that I guess everyone is familiar with. And yeah, I'm quite interested in how the distribution here is. You can already choose. Time is already running. Because I guess we're having some people from Europe or even Africa who join with their morning coffee or tea. Maybe some people from Asia or Australia with their afternoon cup of tea. And I guess people in the Americas should be sleeping right now, but we will see if we have some early bird or night owl from the Americas today. Okay, mostly Europe and Asia. Yes, no early bird or night owl from the Americas. A little as expected. Okay. So then let's move on to the content topics. Now you're familiar with the live poll and you know what we're covering today. And then I think starting with the diverse topic of testing as we identified in our first white paper from Working Group 5 is a good thing. So in the first white paper, which I will show you in a second, we developed this table you can see here. We identified that there are different phases during the life cycle of a device or a system, and that during each phase, different testing could be relevant or is relevant, mandatory, so to say. So the first phases are during the product type or the technology type, refer to the product type or the technology type. So before a product or a technology is introduced to the market, we have to develop it. We have to see if it fulfills the qualification, the needs. If necessary, we also have to certify it and then to prepare a market introduction. Once the product is being manufactured, we also have to take care of the product instances. So a certain device that's being produced, and we need to quality check during manufacturing and also maybe during operation. In our first white paper, we discuss 7 testing types that could be relevant during referring to the product or the technology type, which are validation and demonstration during the development phase, conformance testing for standard or interoperability testing during the qualification phase. Then there might be necessary a certification testing that might depend on whether the product or the technology is subjected to to some rules where your market requires a certification, and maybe your product doesn't because your market doesn't require certification. So that's a little optional. And of course, for the market introduction, we need to validate that the product is working properly, and also some performance testing results could be helpful to see where the performance limits of the product or the technology are. So what is the technology capable of doing at most? So we have some basis for advertising, for example. Once we're in the production and operation phases, we also need to validate the product and to assure that a certain quality is maintained during manufacturing and during operation. There might be topics like a periodic audit, a diagnosis, and failure analysis, and so on. So in the white paper, we identified also several test objects like a base station or a 5G device. It's easy to imagine that all these testing types have to be applied to a certain product or to a certain technology. So this makes the topic even more diverse. You see here a lot of testing types relevant during the life cycle of a device or a system. And the device or system could even be very diverse as well. So there's a lot of options, and in the white paper we discussed these options, and we also identified which ones are of interest for industrial automation. For our test beds, we selected 4 test types. That's a little preview for later. We selected validation, conformance, interoperability, and performance testing. So these are the testing types our test beds can cover. And they choose basically one of the testing types or multiple of them, what they are doing in their work. And this selection bases on the perspective of 5G-ACIA, the current perspective, and might be changed later, but for now, these are our 4 testing types. If you are interested to learn more about these testing types and also the test objects, I'd like to refer you to the white paper that is called Selected Testing and Validation Considerations for Industrial Communication with 5G Technologies. That's quite a long title, but the title says everything that is written in there. In case you're wondering what's in there, you can find some questions on the right that are being answered in the white paper. So we're addressing which requirements to test. We're looking at organizations who are already specifying tests. We're going through all the test objects that there are potentially are in a 5G system, so that is quite an extensive section. And if you want to get more familiar with the topology of a 5G system in general, I can recommend that section as well. And then we move on to describe the testing types and the corresponding test objectives. For example, with the testing type performance testing, we're following the objective of finding out what a technology is or a device, or to use a general word, the test object is able to do just to gain knowledge about what the test object is capable of. Also, based on all these thoughts, we developed the already mentioned recommendations. We're saying what is, from our perspective, relevant to industrial automation, and also to consider what to further consider in 5G-ACIA. So we're up for the third poll, the first content question, and I'd like to ask you what you think is the most interesting type of testing to you. We've got for the 4 options here. I only chose the 4 options that our testbeds are covering. So the validation testing, the conformance testing, which refers to a standard and not getting a certificate, standard conformance testing, interoperability testing, or performance testing. So actually, I'm quite interested in the outcome of this poll, because from my perspective, we need all of these tests. We also will need, in the future, we also will need certification testing. But what I don't know is what's, from your perspective, from your individual applications perspective, with your application glasses on, is the most interesting or the most important test type to you. Aha, that's quite a clear picture, I guess. So about 10% each say validation and conformance testing is most important to them. Interoperability testing is about a quarter, and 55% say that performance testing is most interesting. Well, what a lucky coincidence that we're going to talk about performance testing next. So I hope I can give you some new information on that, because maybe you're all performance testing experts already. So for performance testing, I think it's, again, very important that we remember our industrial application glasses, because when we're talking about whether a communication network or communication system fulfills our requirements, we're always talking about our applications requirements. So does our application work in the end, and how scalable is my application in the end? And for that, I want to conduct a performance testing, possibly, and how to approach a performance testing is what we are also explaining in our white paper. And yeah, I want to give you a quick overview on what we're addressing in the white paper now. So at first, I have to decide what parameters do I want to measure. So what performance parameters are of interest for my application? Am I more interested in the timing-related parameters, or am I more interested in parameters related to reliability, or in what parameter am I in detail interested? So that could be different from depending on your applications. And as you might already feel, I will ask a question later about that. So let's look into the definitions a little later. Once I've decided what's important for my application, what I do want to measure, I also need to say under which conditions am I performing the measurement. So I have to think about the spatial extent that I'm setting up. I have to think about the number of wireless devices that I have in my test, in my network. I have to think about where to position the devices, how I want to move them across my facility. How I want to choose the user data length and the transfer interval. And there are a lot more baseline parameters that we identified, and please refer to the white paper for a complete list of them. So now, just to give you a bit hands-on, when I want to know a certain performance parameter, for example, the transmission time, which is the time a message takes to go from A to B, I maybe want to know the time under different conditions. So I'm forming test groups. For example, I'm increasing the distance, or I'm increasing the user data length, or I'm increasing the number of wireless devices, and then I can see how changing the baseline parameters has an impact on my performance parameters. For example, if I have an AGV fleet in my manufacturing hall, and currently the fleet has 10 AGVs and it works all fine, and now I'm thinking about adding 50 more AGVs to the fleet. And before I buy the AGVs, before I actually buy the AGVs, I want to know whether my system that I already have installed is capable of serving these additional 50 AGVs too. Then I could conduct a performance test on my network and see how scalable my application in the end would be. So that's how the baseline parameters can be used to see the impact on the performance parameters, for example. So now I know what I want to measure, I know what I want to describe, and third thing is I need to know how to measure. So I need a performance testing concept. We will get to that in a second. So how do I measure actually the performance parameters in a reproducible way? Then I have to really carefully think about what I actually want to test. So what is my system under test? What is included in the system under test and what is excluded? We'll also taking a look at a picture in a second. And in the white paper also we're covering a universal concept for different system under test variants, as we call it. And yeah, that's maybe a little too detailed for today, so I refer you to the white paper for that. Okay, so with our glasses from the applications on our head, let's take a look at industrial automation as a system of systems. So that's just a quick reminder. Quickly get a laser pointer, so it's maybe easier to follow which part I'm talking about. So when we're talking about industrial automation and our application, we're always on top here in the picture. We're always in the production system. So that is what has to work. If my manufacturing stops due to some communication error, that's something that I really don't want to have. So the requirements, in the end, they have their origin in the production system itself. Usually, I have a running production that's already using maybe wired communication and has automation devices. So we have a second layer below our production system where something like an industrial Ethernet-based system could be, and several automation devices that translate basically data into control for the electromechanical elements in my production system. And these automation devices, they have to exchange their information somehow. For these three in the left, they exchange the data using an industrial Ethernet-based system. But the others in this example picture, they are using a wireless communication system. So when I think about my application, I have to think about the production system on top. I have to think about what other layers are there, or maybe I have I'm building a new factory and I don't have this layer in detail. I only have components that are automation devices, including the 5G devices. So I carefully have to separate what are the elements in my system. So what are the subsystems of my systems? And once I've done that, I have to decide what actually do I want to test. Do I want to test only the wireless communication system, or do I want to test from the applications perspective, including everything that might be below the application? So ignorant of which technologies are under there, which technologies do the actual communication, whether there's TSN, 5G, other wireless technologies. So that could be very diverse, but from my applications perspective, it just has to work. So when I decided what my system under test is, so what I actually want to test the performance of, I can move on to the next step and form the model or separate my network into the testing system and the system under test. And what happens during the performance testing is that I have my system under test defined, and the testing system emulates the application for the duration of the performance testing. So here, the testing system delivers specified values for the baseline parameters. For example, I'm transmitting at one device every millisecond 50 bytes of user data. And the system under test somehow transfers them, and the test system measures the performance parameters. And when I finish my performance testing, I can evaluate the performance testing results. So why is this separation so important? From our perspective, it is important so that you can get reproducible results. You change baseline parameters and you want to be able to compare them. So if you don't have a clear separation, then a change of baseline parameters is not the only thing that might happen between two tests, right? So there could be other influences that you are not aware of that impact your performance testing results. And if you have a clear separation, you are able to compare results from different different test groups, or even for different system under tests. For example, if you want to compare 5G release 15 performance with 5G release 16 performance. So yeah, I just want to stress once more, it's important that you have a clear separation and a clear objective, what you want to test, and which baseline parameters you are changing and which performance parameters you are looking into. Speaking of performance parameters, I prepared another question for you. So get ready for voting on the performance parameters that are relevant to you. And the first question, I'm giving you the definitions in a second. Which timing performance parameter is most relevant to you? So do you want to know for your application the transmission time, so the time it takes from A to B? Do you need to know the response time? That's the time it takes from A to B and from B to A. Or do you have a cyclic communication so that the message reception interval is interesting to you? You have something that transmits like every milliseconds, and you want to know how the reception interval varies. Is it 1 millisecond with what deviation? Or does your application not need specific timing requirements at all, and you say data throughput is what is relevant for my application? Okay, so that's quite diverse, I guess. There's no clear favorite or most important parameters, so it really seems you have different application in mind, which is great because 5G can be optimized to do all of these things. So we have transmission time with 20%, about 40% for the response time, which is here the maximum. Also, people are interested in the message reception interval, and the least people are interested in data throughput. That's something that I actually find quite interesting because often my impression is that the perspective on 5G is that it will fulfill anything just by delivering a high data rate. So that does not seem to be the case for all applications, that the data throughput is the most important parameter. Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is about the reliability related parameters. And here again, what parameter is most important to you? I'll try to explain a little faster than before. Is it the network availability, which is usually given in percent, referring to time, or is it the message loss ratio? So how many messages are lost in general? Or could you tolerate a higher message loss ratio if the time between failures is large? For example, if I transmit every millisecond data, but I only need every second packet. So the time between failures has to be less than 2 milliseconds. Then I could have a message loss ratio of about 50% even, and still my application would work. So the time between failures would be more relevant for my example application here. Okay, here we have a clear winner, if we want to say winner. That is the network availability is most important. About a quarter of you say it's the message loss ratio, and the time between failures is only relevant for 15% of your applications. Okay, thank you for taking part here. That was very interesting to me, and I hope also a little insightful for you too. And if you thought that was a bit fast for all the definitions, and if you're interested in the other baseline parameters that we defined, you can find them in the performance testing white paper. And I think our office already posted the link also to the chat. Very convenient for everyone joining live today. So in the white paper, we're addressing the previously mentioned questions, and also you can find all the definitions there. And I also like to point you to one recording that we made at the last Hannover Fair last year, which was online about the white paper when it was just out for a few days, explaining the main points again. Okay, that's all I wanted to give you on information on performance testing. Of course, if you're interested in more details, you can just get in touch with 5G-ACIA or also Working Group 5 or me immediately. So let's take a look at our endorsed testbeds. And as mentioned, I just want to give you the framework that 5G-ACIA thought about while the testbeds will present themselves later in the web seminar series in the following 3 web seminars. So about 2 years ago, we started working on a testbed framework, and in the summer 2020, we issued our first call for testbed applications, which had quite some responses, which we are very happy about, and we were able to officially endorse 4 testbeds about 1 year ago, and then 3 more testbeds followed during the course of last year. And currently, as of January 2022, we're reviewing 2 more applications. So that's for the formal timeline. For the framework, we defined that our testbeds should be more not really test labs that are endorsed for their lifetime, but they have more a project character. So we're endorsing basically some activities that a testbed group wants to take on, and that what the testbed team wants to do has to be described in a formal application to 5G-ACIA. On the next slide, we'll look into what actually an application should contain in detail. So this application contains everything that 5G-ACIA has decided it wants to know, and this is going through a peer review. And the peer review ensures that the task, the objectives that a testbed, endorsed testbed follows are in line with the goals of 5G-ACIA, or that the objectives are prone to produce results that are relevant for industrial 5G users. Once the peer review is completed, it gives a recommendation to the plenary. The plenary meetings in 5G-ACIA happen 4 to 6 times a year, so quite regularly we are able to review testbed applications with all members of 5G-ACIA, and hopefully we're getting an approval, which then means for the testbed members that they can start working on the objectives that they chose themselves, and they are following their own timeline here. During operation, there's some reporting internally done in 5G-ACIA, and in the end of a testbed's lifetime, the results are again shared with 5G-ACIA and again reviewed, peer reviewed to terminate the testbed. Of course, the testbed infrastructure, so the 5G system and so on, it is already present at the testbed location. So what is of course allowed is that the testbeds reapply to be an endorsed testbed with new objectives, so with new questions to answer. so to say. So in the next 4 slides, we're going through the individual phases of a testbed lifecycle. And then there will be one more question for you, of course, as promised. So during the application phase, the testbed members have to at first form a group. We decided that we want to have a testbeds with only at least 2 members. So that is important because we wanted to foster collaboration and we wanted to ensure that results are relevant for more than one 5G-ACIA member. It is also possible to collaborate with non-5G-ACIA members if at least 70% are 5G-ACIA members among the testbed members. We allow certain testbed scopes and testing types. You can find them on the left-hand side, and this is to ensure that the outcomes are really relevant for 5G-ACIA members. Then we allow different testbed purposes, for example, demonstration, or we also have a testbed that's aiming at comparing the performance of 5G for different releases. So that could also be a purpose. And yeah, in addition to that, of course, the applicants have to name detailed technical information about their 5G network, and they also have to make a time plan, what activities they want to conduct and what they expect to deliver to 5G-ACIA. And they do that in form of a milestone planning. And the interim results are shared within 5G-ACIA. They are also reviewed. So if there's something really interesting coming up, that our members are aware of that quite soon after the information was available. So during the application phase, the review team also supports the applicants, of course, and once the application is finalized, it's brought to the plenary for approval. Hopefully everything is approved. That's ensured by the review team, who's taking a close look into the objectives, also making sure that the objectives are new. We don't want to have 2 testbeds working on the same question. So this is something that's also assured in the process that 5G-ACIA has with its testbeds. After the approvals, the testbeds start working. During operation, as mentioned, there will be regular reports, milestone reports, and 5G-ACIA members have also access to that reports. Once a testbed is terminated, 5G-ACIA plans to assess the results and also decides what to share publicly or in what form to share publicly. This is something Working Group 5 will be also working on. Maybe, unfortunately, is not the correct word, but currently we don't have any terminated testbeds, so I'd ask you to stay tuned. We expect the first testbeds to be finished by the middle of this year, and after that we will share, of course, results from all the testbeds. And if you want to learn earlier about our testbeds, you can, of course, join the next 3 webinars, which I already mentioned like 13 times, but I will not get tired of that because I guess these sessions will be very interesting. Okay, so this is all about our endorsed testbed program, what our testbeds are doing, how they are doing that they have more kind of a project character and have a life cycle that can be repeated. The question I want to ask you next, that is question number 6, is about what, from your perspective, would be the most interesting outcome from a testbed. So there could be different outcomes. For example, I chose 3 examples here. A demonstration example, a 5G network that is like this and that is able to support this and that application. So that would be a demonstration example. Are you interested in performance testing results as mentioned earlier? Or are you looking from a different angle at the testbeds and you are more interested in experience on network operation, like how to choose a vendor, how to configure the 5G network, how to configure devices. So all the operational aspects that you might also have to deal with when you want to use your own 5G system in your facilities. So demonstration, proof of concept examples, performance testing results for certain configurations, or are you coming from the perspective of sharing experience on network operations? So you, it's easier for you to operate your own network then in the end. Okay, again, performance testing is leading here with 45%, and a similar value holds for the proof of concept examples and the sharing experience. I think that's quite interesting also for 5G-ACIA that some of you, and I mean 30% is not a small number, is interested in fact not so much in proof of concept or performance testing results, but in how do I actually do that? So that's something that's really valuable feedback for Working Group 5. So also thank you for participating here. So now I'm going to mention it's the 14th time that we are going to have 3 more web seminars coming up that will feature all of our 7 currently endorsed testbeds. In the first 2 web seminars, we are going to learn about the 4 testbeds that were actually approved about a year ago, so they are able to already share some first results. While in the third web seminar, there are the 3 testbeds that only recently started their work. So here you can learn about what their testbed objectives are. And this is also, you can see that from the time, these 2, they are these 2 web seminars, the testbed members are covering their objectives and also sharing first results. And here each testbed has a little less time, but that's okay because they are not sharing results, not yet sharing results. They are just showing their objectives. And I think that's quite interesting. All of them are quite interesting because you can see here from the titles, when you just look through the titles, I guess the office already posted also a link to the short descriptions, that that's very diverse what the testbeds are working on or looking into. For example, we have different application areas, semiconductor factory, industrial robotics. Here we have AI services and smart manufacturing. Over here, we have a material handling demonstrator, which combines cranes and AGVs. Also looking into more technological aspects like the open RAN testbed we have in Nuremberg. And here in Berlin, it's ultra-reliable low latency communication. And also the 5G Industry Campus Europe is part of our testbed group. So I'll just encourage you once more to take part here because I guess it's a really interesting and hands-on experience that people will be sharing with you. Okay, moving on to a sneak preview. I guess it's already getting a little late, so just a quick view into the perspective that 5G-ACIA has on certification. And the first statement that from my perspective is very important is that this is work in progress. We started a work item that will deliver an internal report by which will identify gaps that existing certification processes have that are relevant for industrial use cases. And here again, as you can see on the right-hand side, we have the issue of thinking about what exactly should be certified. Are we certifying an end-to-end connection, or are we certifying just the 5G device? And what is interesting to our end users after all? And before more time passes, I'd just like to ask you one more question about that. So 5G-ACIA will follow up on the certification issues, also based on our experience that we gain with the testbeds, but also maybe on your feedback, which you can give us with that last question. And that is, from your perspective, what would be the aspect most important to be certified? So we've seen that there are a lot of test objects, and what is, from your perspective, the test object that's most important to be certified for your application? Is it the device or the network, which means the core network and the radio access network without the devices? Or do you think for your application, it would be helpful to have a certification of the overall 5G system? And when asking that question, it's clear that we don't know yet how we would certify an overall 5G system, or if it's possible at all to certify end-to-end connections. That's just a question not of what is possible, but what is important to you. Aha. So a clear favorite option here again, that is the overall 5G system. Yeah, maybe a little expected, but also, of course, the most challenging thing to certify. So that's something that we will take to Working Group 5 then. So thanks for your feedback. And then let's move to the last slide before we go to answer live questions. That's summarizing, from my perspective, today's takeaways. So testing is an incredibly diverse topic. We've seen that from the first white paper that we discussed in 5G-ACIA, and yet it is incredibly crucial for 5G to come to practice. And this is why we have our testbed program, testbed endorsement program, so that we really have hands-on experience with 5G that we can share with all people out there who want to use 5G for their industrial applications. And we did already a lot of work in that field, and we're continuing to work on that field, of course. So testing is an ongoing activity. Again, I'd be happy if you keep in touch with us on that. If you are a 5G-ACIA member, or if you are not a 5G-ACIA member, but you know some 5G-ACIA members, of course, you're also invited to hand in an application and to get the support from the 5G-ACIA community for your testing objectives. And with that, thank you for participating, all the many questions that I had for you today. Thank you for taking your time to get some information about testing in 5G-ACIA. And with that, I'd hand over to Uwe, who has been monitoring questions that might be there from you guys.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you first of all, Lisa, for the very comprehensive and detailed information. Yeah, it was also for me interesting to see the results of the live polls. I said, anyhow, this whole session will be recorded, so we can hear it also again. From the question answered, yes, currently we have, there's one question which I will read through, but you still can ask questions, so please feel free to do it even now. So let me read the question. This already gives a little bit, I think, indication also about the live polls, because it's about performance testing and about the system, I would say, the network. So the question here is from Din Bubbly. So how much extra complexity is added to performance testing where the industrial 5G network is part of a wider network cloud edge compute infrastructure? I would say that's a even two-sided question. And the second part is what happens if network slicing, so the 5G network slicing is used in the 5G domain. So I would say it's even two questions, which are quite complex.
But maybe if we take again the industrial applications perspective, the performance testing might not get that much more complex. Because if you decide to really look from your applications perspective, it is not that important if there's network slicing active, or if you're using a cloud service or something like that. So you just have your testing devices that form the testing system. You connect it instead of connecting your application on top of all of your systems, and then you see how your overall system behaves. So that's not getting more complex. I guess what is getting more complex is that you have more baseline parameters to define, because let alone the network slicing, you have a lot of parameters that you can configure. So you have to choose what to really test, because even though your testing setup is not more complex, you might now run into restrictions time-wise that you cannot conduct all possible combinations that there are due to things like network slicing, which increase just the number of baseline parameters that you can configure. I hope that answered the question. If not, of course, feel free to contact me afterwards. Then we can have a detailed chat about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I would also say so. As said, currently we don't have more questions, but I would maybe just that you can answer this again, ask you one short question. You said for the endorsed testbeds from 5G-ACIA, you don't need to be a member. So there's, maybe you explain this again, there's a possibility even if you're not a member yet, you can even look into this endorsed testbeds. Can you give short information on this?
Actually, yeah, maybe that was a little fast then. So we have the testbed, the group of testbed members, which has to be at least 2 members big, but it can also be larger. And if you, for example, have 4 members in one endorsed testbed, one of the members does not have to be a 5G-ACIA member. So 3 member companies, 1 non-member company can team up to follow an objective, and that enables also that 5G-ACIA members can add 1 partner they are working with maybe in another project to their endorsed testbed, and also for people or companies who are not in 5G-ACIA yet to gain some experience here. And of course, there's one more thing that I did not mention yet, is that we also have a role we call testbed guests. So it's of course possible to get in touch with the testbeds and to just ask them what they are doing, or ask them if you can join for a particular reason, for a particular objective. And that's also open to all members or non-members to just get in touch with our endorsed testbeds and to learn more about what they are exactly doing, and maybe even contribute. But that's then part of a discussion among testbed members and the potential testbed guest.
Good. Thank you, Lisa, for explaining this again. I said maybe for those who are not yet members, that they have also an option. I don't see more questions yet. Therefore, I would say we will come to an end of the webinar. Again, big thank you, Lisa, for your comprehensive explanation, and also for all the guests who contributed to the live polls, which, as you said, were quite interesting and will help also 5G-ACIA Working Group 5 especially to look into this in more detail. I will repeat what you said. So we have the next web seminar, January 26th, if again in the morning. The other 2 will be then in the afternoon, which is more friendly for the guests who are not in yet, as you said, from Americas. So the next one, January 26th. So please, if you've not done, register here. Is that again in the morning about first results, also related to this EU project 5 Smart Testbed, about the semiconductor factory automation at Bosch. And the second one, which is also very interesting, about 5G smart manufacturing and industrial IA services, so artificial intelligence services with validation and results. So please do so. So with this, I'd like to thank you all. Again, also for the host, as well as Lisa, to you. And yes, join us again. You will see here again the information. Thanks, and have a good day or afternoon, evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks again from my side. Looking forward to talking to you soon. Bye-bye.